Hi folks, you're with Tassos today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a parallel situation that I personally experienced that has at least a sufficient number of similarities to how President Trump's agenda, his political agenda and his policy agenda were frustrated by the deep state operatives and their flunkies and goons and so on. So I guess the parallels are in the methods that we use to frustrate an agenda. Obviously, the scale is quite different in one's government, the other's private sector, but the parallels are there. And so this is an insight as to how the deep state functions and how it imposes its will and resists even the most determined attempts at reform and accountability. How the deep state misinforms to gain the outcome it wants, how it slow walks policies it does not agree with and doesn't want, and how it undermines anything that does not enhance or entrench its own power and its own interests. So again, this is using, to a large extent, my personal experience to illustrate the point. Some years back, I was hired into an EVP gig, an executive vice president gig for a company who was in danger. He was in the danger zone of will it or will it not financially survive. It was kind of doing okay, but the costs were out of control, and there was very obvious and clear signs of mismanagement and a small elite who were just really stuffing money in their pockets, and they didn't give a shit about really the business or anything. They were just in it for themselves. So just to add a bit of various context on this, the board of directors was made up of various factions, and of course there was the money boys downtown. They each wanted their preferred appointee to get the gig of trying to turn the business around, because again the revenues were good, the bare bones were there to have a very nice business, and it had been so, but it had gone into decline again due to costs out of control being the primary thing, or the mismanagement, which in turn led to the costs being out of control. So, but the factions in the board weren't able to agree as to, I want my guy to run. No, I want my guy. I don't want your guy. And so really they all sort of cancelled each other out. And then they decided they had to go outside of the network of people they knew and just get a complete outsider, which in itself was quite a courageous move and suggests that they were somewhat serious about solving the problems and turning things around. These were people that never go outside of their network of friends and relatives. So this was a huge step for them. It was the equivalent of considering Harry Carey. It was that much of a traumatic path for them. But once they decided to do that, they then thought, well, what sort of person are we going to get? It has to be somebody who's tough enough to make the hard decisions that we think need to be made, but they can't be too strong that we can't bash them up and beat them up and slap them around in the boardroom. We have to be able to hold, intimidate them and get them to do what we want and get them to shut up when we want them to shut up, and all that sort of stuff. It's if we had a fight with them, who would win? And you'd be surprised how often that's a consideration in hiring executives. So now, because normally the board meetings were held like once a year or maybe once every 6 months. But since things had gone south, they were having board meetings every week, and all they really achieved there was annoying and stirring each other up and getting into a fret and that sort of thing. They had a list of preferred candidates for the gig, but these guys were close enough to their social networks and had sort of still some pretty good options for themselves. So why would they want to take on a high risk job that was a lot of work, a lot of late nights, a lot of sweat and blood, and when there was easier meat out there? So their first sort of list of preferred candidates, nobody's really interested, or if they were interested, they wanted such a massive payout that the board didn't want them. So then they got to the next list outside, and that's where I came along. And now I was inclined to walk away as well, because it did look like a lot of work with some very high risk. And it was really dependent on if the board's going to back you. If the board doesn't back you, or they go lukewarm, or they go weak at the knees, then you're in an impossible position, and you just got to leave. And then you've got, for my age and situation at the time with mortgages and school fees and everything, I thought I didn't, I really thought twice for taking on that risk. But they waived a nice big bonus for, under my nose. So I thought, okay. So I started there. Now, the management team may have been a bunch of, these are the guys sort of who were like reporting to the executive vice president's role. They may have been lazy, careless, or even useless, and very entitled socialites. But as a group, they were really thick. They'd all been to the same schools, same universities. They all belonged to the same, polo clubs and yacht clubs. They knew each other socially. Their families knew each other going back even a generation or more. They exchanged girlfriends and mistresses. They came from generations of wealth, most of them. The parents were, like president or secretary of the art gallery, patron of the museum, treasurer of the yacht club, secretary of the country club, and so on. So that's the set. And I didn't come from that set, so I was an outsider in two ways. One, they didn't know me, and I didn't come from the wealthy end of town. It wasn't a poor background I had, far from it, but certainly wasn't at their level of wealth and privilege. Now, as they saw it, the workplace wasn't a place where you did work. It was a place for preening and posing and posturing, pretending, socializing. And the world, the real world, the practical world was like an abstract concept to them. The reality was whatever they invented it and manufactured it to be, and they were able to live that way and see the world that way. And that I perceived the workplace to be, well, like a place of work, struck them as rather quaint and, if not faintly, amusing. And I remember some of the the looks I used to get. You think work is a place of work? Oh, you poor silly man, So work was for plebs, and my elevating work and results and getting the job done and so on to a status of some importance or primary importance, given the situation that we're all in. Was, in their view, an indication of rather ill-bred attitudes, and it was to some degree amusing to me to see these lazy, entitled people who never lived in the real world themselves, thinking everyone else was was strange. It's a bit of the emperor's sort of clothes there. Inserted in between the management team and the CEO and the board and the management group decided to gauge. Because I was sort of reporting to the board, and so I was in between the management group, which was the guys reporting into the EVP role, decided to gauge the real support that I was going to get from the board, and by engaging in a trial of strength. It was like, who is going to win, and so they decided they wouldn't accept direction, or they would very quietly, they'd pretend to accept direction, smile to your face, but they go away, and clearly the decision, I'm not going to take any fucking notice of you, buddy. So they wanted to see, they were testing how much the board would support me, and I hadn't quite expected such a test so early on. But they were adamant. Look, you're talking about hard work, you're talking about doing the job, you're talking about arriving at work on time and this sort of thing, doing a good day's work. No, that's not for us, buddy. So they pushed back, and if the board had failed to support me and they could ignore and ride roughshod over the EVP's office, which was their intention, if the board support was even lukewarm or conditional, the management group could then pick and choose the issues of non-compliance and what they would go along with, what they wouldn't. But if the board supported me quite solidly, then they decided they would switch to underhanded subterfuge and slow walking and so on. So, comparing this to the Trump thing, if you look at the first 2 years of Trump's office, he had majority in Congress, in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and yet the Republican Party support of him and his policies was really lukewarm. They kind of supported him, but really they sort of, we'll only support you because you're slightly better than having Hillary in there, but we don't really want to support you. So it's very lukewarm support, and there was a lot of fumbles and a lot of Jeff Sessions for all his good intentions, and I think he was filled with good intentions. He allowed the Democrat Party to really run rings around him and set up those bullshit Russia inquiries, which so hobbled the administration for that first couple of years as well. So that lukewarm support really puts you on the defensive. You're working twice as hard just to sort of stay still without even furthering your agenda, which is the situation that I found myself in. So, while everyone was in varying degrees of agreement, the company was in trouble, and even in agreement that tough decisions needed to be made, they all believed that and this is the management team reporting into me, they believed that they uniquely should be completely exempted from any privation or any suffering or any risk themselves. They believed that other people should take the risks and they should go on as they were. And they would give lip service to the situation. They would say how terrible it was, but as long as they didn't have to make any sacrifices. And they would come into my office, say, look, why should I have to? I'm a good guy. But they would, I try and reason with them and say, look, the problem's something that we all have. We all have to do something about this. And they, no. And they would cite that their social status should exempt them, which comes back to the elites in the United States now. They refer to Trump voters as the lowest of the low, and that they as elites are entitled to everything they have, and any pain and suffering should be borne by other people, but not them under any circumstances. And so this mention of social status is the sole and only reasons why they should be exempted from sacrifice and risk. And by the way, from the consequences of their own failures. They believe their failures were because they alleged they were well intended. They believe they therefore shouldn't have to accept responsibility for them. And if other people suffered or had to make sacrifices because of it, well, that's their lot in life. If they had the right social status, then they too could exempt themselves. They don't, so tough on them. So they made no effort to point out that they were doing a good job of getting good results, or they were achieving things from their ingenuity or hard work or commercial prudence. That was just those are problems for someone else to think about. And it kind of irritated me that they believed accountability or responsibility was a sign of not having enough important friends in the right places. Accountability, it means that you're just in the bottom rung of things, because people at the top rung, they don't have to be accountable, shouldn't have to be accountable. In fact, it's outrageous to think they should be accountable. Consequences were for other, lesser people, but not for them. Thus, to even entertain the idea of personal responsibility was in itself, as they saw it, a direct attack on their self-image as a member of the elite. Now, the main areas of concern that I needed to address were runaway personal expense accounts, which they viewed this as like a personal bonus that they could effectively allocate themselves without reference to any amount of money that was available or any financial prudence. And they generously shared these expense accounts with their relatives, and in some cases even their friends. And there were crazy things where somebody's mother would decide that she wanted to go for a vacation somewhere, and would just put it on the son or the daughter's expense account, and the company would just pay it. Other things where they would decide to do an expensive renovation on an investment property they had, and they would just buy all the bits and pieces on the company credit card, and they would pay it back later. But if they sold the property for what they thought was a less profit than they expected, the investment property, and sold it for less profit than expected, they would then decide they were not going to pay back some of the money that they, and these effectively were loans for speculating in real estate. There was no controls over that, and it was a huge drag on the company's cash flow, because all the elite group were getting in on it, because it was a nice way to bolster their income and increase their prestige amongst their friends and relatives and so on. There's also use of a lot of well-connected consultants who again were just socialite hangers-on with no expertise or knowledge, and no desire to be helpful, but with a very entitled attitude that they needed a certain amount of money to live the lives that they thought they were entitled to. And the service they offered were undefined. And I called some of them and said, "What exactly do you do?" And well, "What do you want to know for? Why do you care? I'm entitled to $20,000 a month, and who the fuck are you to question it?" It was. You think, no, I'm not having this conversation. But that was the attitude that they had. There were large amounts of inventory disappearing from the warehouses, and people were just running businesses on the side and just stealing whatever they wanted from the warehouse. Again, completely entitled, and were even annoyed that they were questioned. Why did you take out $50,000 worth of stuff from the warehouse? Well, why? I can do it if I want to. And it was quite remarkable. Again, today I sit back and I can hardly believe it was happening, but it was. And they'd been allowed to get away with it for a while, so none of them really had any experience in business. None of them had ever had to be accountable for what they did, and so they really had no concept of it. And to them, this was merely a vehicle to aggrandize themselves and to enrich themselves at someone else's expense, and they thought that was fine. There was a lot of meetings that went on for an entire day, meetings that would start at 9:30 in the morning and they'd still be going at 5 o'clock or even later. And these meetings, of course, they'd start bringing in special, and then these people weren't pizzas and coffee or something. These people were. They'd go to special places, get lobster, Mornay, and champagne, and that's the sort of stuff they would have being brought into the meeting. So they'd kick on until 10 at night, all rollicking drunk before they left. And these meetings weren't meetings; they were just bullshit symposiums for posturing and preening, and that was all. And again, they thought they were entitled to, so they had no concept of workplace disciplines, and there was mind-boggling tardiness, people rocking in. There's a guy who was, in fact, more than one person, there's a guy who was attending university full-time to get his PhD. So he'd come in the morning, shuffle a few papers around, head off, and then you might not see him for a few days, and then he's doing his PhD and collecting a full salary and bonuses, expense account, the whole thing, living very well while he's doing his PhD at the company's expense. But again, cashing the guy out, saying, "Hey, no, he had nothing to apologise for, nothing. He was entitled to that, and I wasn't entitled to make any inquiries." Same thing with some of these loans. That one guy just bought an investment property, and he was just about to kit it out, and these people weren't going to Home Depot or something or whatever to get their bits and pieces. They were going to the top of the town places to get their bits and pieces. So it was nothing for them to drop 100, 150, 200,000 more on the company credit card. Well, they paid for their renovations. So this guy just bought a place. He went around, I brought the hammers. No, you're not going to fucking renovate the place at the company's expense. I mean, Jesus, And he's very put out. And I even had his wife on the phone, calling me, "You disgust me, you horrible man." Because in her cognition, she was entitled to that. That she was entitled to that benefit, and just couldn't see why. That it couldn't go on forever or for as long as they wanted anyway. Even trying to explain look, the company's going to go broke in another 12 months if this continues. Didn't care, just kept straight on going. Don't care if it goes broke. We'll just find another place to parasite off. But you just have to let us have what we want to have, and you fuck off out of the way. So putting a stop to these things was no easy task, and this is where the main battleground was, where the slow walking and all those things. So putting a stop to, say, all-day meetings that achieved nothing and had the champagne and the lobster Mornay being brought in, this was howls of protest, particularly from the female management staff members. The guys were because they kind of got it that it was a bit excessive to have be still at the office at 10 at night drinking Moe or Bollinger or something. So the girls were very put out by this, but the guys not so much. But I said, look, if you want to have meetings, you've got to have a reason for the meeting, and you've got to have a reason as to who you're inviting and why you're inviting them, an agenda, and what you're going to talk about. This was howls of protest, absolute screams of pain from all directly. It was a simple thing. If you want to hold a meeting, there has to be a reason for it. But they didn't see it that way. It was a social thing, and where they could talk about what they did on the weekend or what they're going to do that night or something. And again, these are well-connected people. You know, their friends include, you know, the leading paediatrician in the Australian hospital system, and thinking, you know, these guys knew all the heavies, and that was the crowd they ran with, and that they thought that alone entitled them to behave in the way they did. So the reviewing of the expense account set off a crescendo of anxious knocks on the CEO. You know, there were people just queuing up to go to his door saying, "Hey, I need this meeting. I want to buy another investment property. What's happening here?" But the CEO largely, you know, stuck with me on this. I mean, you know, he wavered a little bit, but I pointed out, you know, I went in with the sheets. Look, here's all the money these people are taking out. Here's the money they owe. I mean, you can't let this go on. It's like you know, an artery's been opened and all the blood's flowing out. You know, we've got to stop the loss of blood. So he kind of agreed, but again, he didn't want. He meets these people on weekends. Their families meet and talk and so on, and he's got to have his justifications ready. He doesn't want to admit the company's in as much trouble as it is, because that reflects badly on him. This is the CEO and even the board as well. So they have to find some sort of middle course. So instead they sell it that they've hired a guy to try and lick things in the shape that needed it, but he's just being a bit overzealous. But don't worry, it'll all settle down soon. So that's how they tried to bullshit their way out of it. But sometimes they would sway them, because they're all having lunch on the weekend or dinner on the weekend, and they're all in the CEO or the chairman's ear, and trying to get him to reverse the policies that I'm putting in place. Same as I'm sure there were all the globalists were going to, like the Mitch McConnells and all these people, and you know, the Paul Ryans, and everyone saying, "Look, you got to stop Trump, frustrate him, try and fuck him up, you know, try and get in the way of his thing." It would have been sort of something similar, and it would take me a few days, because Monday he'd come in, the CEO, and he, you know, "I want to see you," and then I could see he was backpedaling on things. You just knew they got to him on the weekend, and so. But it would take me till Wednesday to talk him back into get him back into the groove. And it was, you know, a lot of energy, a lot of stress, just handling that sort of stuff. And it seems like you're fighting everybody to try and get something done. The other option I had was hiring my buddies and bringing them in and saying, "Okay, well, I'm going to hire my buddies who are loyal personally to me. We'll make sure my agenda gets put through." But that was the one of the big problems the company has. But everyone was hiring everyone's mates. They had buddies and hangers on. So that was part of the problem. And I didn't want to replace the problem with the same problem. Just instead of being loyal to other people, they were loyal to me. That sort of didn't really solve the cultural issue itself. It would have given me, less stress for me, giving the fighting I was always doing. But the outside consultants also started making threats against me when they realised that their gravy train was about to come to an end. So, to give you an idea in the size of the company, they were hemorrhaging millions of dollars every month, as you can imagine, given what was going on. But just by preventing and stopping the excesses, and some of them I couldn't stop, the fight wasn't worth it. But these excesses. The company was starting to show a profit just from curing it, which gives you an idea of the millions that were pouring out the door for no purpose. But the group resisted every step of the way, and it was just an endless struggle to get even simple things done. But just sort of looking at how they did the slow walking and things like that. When I'd ask for information about, say, the accounts, for example, what are the, how much money is being out on these expense account credit cards, I wanted to, and they came back with a figure that was well below what it was. Now, fortunately, I knew enough of the amounts that people had, so I could look at go, no, that's not it. That's not even half of it. But as it turns out, that the chief accountant is also a part of their group. So when I asked for it, he'd gone to them. They talked about it, and they said, well, don't give it to him. Give him much lower figure, otherwise he'll go ballistic and start interfering in this and that. We don't want him to. So they wanted to pretend the amount of money was much less than it was. I figured that was the thing. So I went to the chief accountant, said, no, I want the fucking accurate figure. And so we had a thing in there. He tried to fudge it and so on, but no, I stayed on him until I dug it out. So, and was then able to take action, being fully informed, but they were constantly doing this, giving me the wrong information, or I'd say, go and I'd say, well, I want this done or that done. And then they would bring in a consultant to do it. Then the consultant would mysteriously be sick for a week, and then, oh no, we're just waiting, they'll be running. And then so they'd use all these various little, very deceitful, almost childlike methods to delay and frustrate and obstruct what I was trying to do. And they were hoping that I'd forget about it or some other priority would come up in the meantime, and so that I'd lose sight of it. Some of them tried just point blank, saying, no, fuck off. Don't care what you tell me to do. I'm not going to do it. And it was hard to fire some of these people. Again, I went into fire. One guy went to the CEO, look, I've got to fire so-and-so. And he said, no, you can't do that, can't do that. My father and his father are close friends, they're the best buddies, and we never could face them over the dinner table on Sunday if we did that. So you have to find another way. And these guys knew that. They knew they were sufficiently well connected that I probably couldn't fire them. So, but you couldn't let them get away with that either, because then that infects other people that think, no, they can all say that we're not going to take any notice of your directives or your instructions and so on. So I was able to deal with it in different ways, and get the guy to at least sullenly accept direction and to stop some of the misbehaviour. But those were the sort of things, and they prepared to resort to serious treachery, really, and all sorts of lies and misinformation. They also went to spreading rumours about me, saying this, that I was this or that or so and so. And again, these things that Trump had to put up with. So in the end, I suppose it was, I could say at the end, I kind of had a draw with them. I wouldn't say that if I won, it wasn't by much. So I probably did come out slightly in front really at the end of the day, but the stress and the strain and the fight and the energy that it's consumed was more than it was worth, given the pay and the level of achievement. Having said that, I wouldn't do it with my time over again. I wouldn't do it differently. I may not have accepted the job, but I wouldn't do it differently. That was a fight that had to be fought, but it was an indictment of, I believe it's an indictment of them, because they are the ruling elite, and the same here as they are in other countries, and they're the ones that are absolutely entitled and think that their benefits should stay intact no matter what is falling. The world could be collapsing all around them, on fire and brimstone in all directions, but they want their benefits to stay intact, and only other people should suffer the consequences of that. So that's just a little bit of an insight into how they would have, some insight into how they would have slow walked Trump's policies, and how they would have tried to nobble it here and there and just refuse to go along with it. And of course, Harry Truman once said that when he became president, he said, when I became president, I thought I could just say, do this, do that, and do so and so. And he said, I had no idea that when you're the president, you tell people to do things, absolutely nothing happens, or it's words to that effect at least. So that's my take on things, and that's a little story to share with you all there. Thanks very much. You've been with Tassus today, and